Hello again. You probably know that I have been going through the Nazarene Acts and reading that, trying to put together an audio book. I'm through the first 5 of 10 books in that series. It's dramatized to some extent, and I use some sound effects and so forth. But when I put that book together, evidently I was in a trance or anointed or something because I don't remember it. I do not remember doing it. I do remember discovering that book in about, I'm going to say 1990 or so. There was just a little smidgen of it in Schleiermacher's New Testament Apocrypha collection. And I read like it was the first chapter of the first book. And I thought, this is so intriguing. And so I began to look for that book. And of course, it wasn't on the internet or anything at that time. I don't think it came on till late. But I finally did find the book, which I found out was called The Clementine Recognitions and Homilies, in a theological library up in Tennessee. And I ordered it, and they were able to send it down to me. I could only keep it for a few days, so I photocopied it. And then I found that it had been translated into English from Latin. And I was able to also to find the Latin version of that book and noticed that it was a very good translation by Rufinus in the 5th century in Latin. And Smith, I don't know, 17th or 18th century, did the English translation. It was quite good, just very wordy. And we find that as we read through it, a lot of the expressions aren't as we would say today. Now, going back on it after this time and reading through it, I am rediscovering things. This book is so contemporary with, well, I can't say current events, although there are some similarities, but with our common observations in our faith. And one of those categories of observations is what we have been working on for the last few months, and that is spiritual activity. I don't know if you've ever been around deliverance ministry much or been in crowds where this is going on, or crowds of people where demonized people come under the power of the Holy Spirit and observed what kind of actions that the demon puts them through when they're under that kind of power. But these things that I've seen are almost all of them are related in this book, the homilies or the recognitions, which I put together as the Nazarene Acts. So if you never read this book, you can download the e-copy or buy a copy online, or get the first 5 of the 10 books. That would be about the first 150 pages in audio from the site www.nazareneacts.com. It's there. If you download the ebook, if you haven't gotten that before, you're going to need a password on that. I mean, you can download it, but to open the book up, the password is "let me in." One word, "let me in." We'll go look at that little site right now, and I just put it up. Aha, there it is. Just something simple. If you like this book, you can pass it on, pass the site on. You can download a playlist here. On a playlist, there's a little file. You save it to your desktop. Then you go out to the desktop, double click on it, and it should bring up your audio player. And everything I've got done so far is in that playlist. So it'll play. And if you look at your audio player, if you open your audio player up, you can see the different tracks there and put it down to wherever you want. You know, oh, of course. I think there is a. Which one is it?
Just under Vero Senior High, this audio version will be employed as a fundraiser instead of a.
Where?
Under Vero Senior High, scroll down, right there, right there.
Will be employed as. Oh, yes. Thank you very much. We can't have that, especially with old Eagle Eye looking at it. Old Eagle Eye Ann. Okay. Here's the playlist. You'll see that it's a file that has an extension .m3u. You can only really pick it up in an audio player, which will come up if you double click on it. There's a couple of samples if you want to hear some of the samples of the dramatized parts. That'll let's see what happens. They'll come right up and play.
So now we have a sample of.
There we go. You can buy the book at this link. It's expensive, but if you want to buy it and want a discount, let me know. Otherwise, whatever comes of that, I use in the ministry to pay for some of this website stuff. You can request the ebook. Or contact me, and I'll send you the ebook and some more ebooks, plus the password to get into it. Here's a description, a little picture, a couple of reviews. One by K Redwine, as a matter of fact. Nice review. One by Donald McGrew. So what I thought I would do is I picked out some of the passages. What is this? Stop share. I don't know what that is. I picked out some of the passages that have to do with our topic, and I highlighted in those passages some of the succinct directions regarding our subject. And I put those in my notes, which I'll bring up here now. If you like to do studies or like to do stuff with text, this book here, OneNote, is really good. I mean, here's all my notes, all in this big section here, and I can go to any one of them. Right there they are, including coffee machine. You can store pictures in there. You can highlight text, as I have. You just cut and paste the text and put it in there, actually. So a lot of these things that are difficult for me, I can put them together here. You can edit them in any way. You can bring in pictures or films or whatever you want, and you can format in here, and everything's kept here. You never have to save anything because it automatically saves. And they have been updating it and improving it over and over again. So I didn't like it at first, but I like it now. Let's see, how do I get this out of here? I just have, there. There, everything went away. So far, going through it, chapter or book 4 is the one that's so full of stuff. However, the earlier books, there are some things that I'll go through here too. And I'm going to read, and if you'll follow along, and then maybe we could do a little commentary on these. As I said again, the striking thing is that what was going on 2,000 years ago, as far as manifestations, the same ones are still going on today. So it makes me think that here in Kefa's or Peter's uh, descriptions of these different things, that it's almost like, well, it is like these are the same descriptions today, and maybe you'll be familiar with some. But when he saw the crowds, that the crowds had, like the waters of a great river, poured over the narrow passage, he mounted upon a pillar that stood near the wall of the garden and first saluted the people in his usual manner. This again is Kefa. But some of those who were present and who had been for a long time distressed by demons threw themselves on the ground, while the unclean spirits entreated that they might be allowed but for one day to remain in the bodies that had taken possession of. But Kefa rebuked them and commanded them to depart, and they went out without delay. Now, we wonder why that doesn't happen today. I've got news for you. It does happen today. If you're ever in a place where this is practiced. And Kefa later on, which we'll see, gives the directions on how one can have complete control over such things as this. And that was the thing that was very interesting to me, is how. And how it's kind of relieving to know how when you find out. It's really not what you think or what we imagine today gives us spiritual power. Here's one from the second book. And how comes it that when rain is withheld in a long drought, we all turn our eyes to the sky and entreat the gift of rain from Yahweh Almighty? And all of us with our little ones pour out prayers to Elohim and entreat his compassion. But truly ungrateful beings, when they obtain the blessing, quickly forget. For as soon as they have gathered in their harvest or their vintage, straight away they offer the first fruits to deaf and dumb images and pay vows in hekalim, that is, temples or groves, for those things that Yahweh Elohim has bestowed on them, and then offer sacrifices to demons, and having received favor, deny the bestower of favor. How many times have you been in a prayer meeting where somebody so seriously prays for something or asks you to pray for something, and then when it comes to pass, they offer thanksgiving to luck, or to good fortune, or to someone else, or even to the one that's praying? Wow, that one must have power. Instead of to Elohim, Yahweh. I write in one of my other things that a woman in particular that was a teenager, had several abortions, and was married, and her husband didn't know about these things, and she was supposed to be barren because of that. She asked for prayer. Her becoming pregnant was impossible. But we prayed right there in the crowd. 10 months later, she brings forth her new child to be baptized. And I hear her talking to other people about how lucky I was. Hey, luck had nothing to do with that. What had to do with it is that she called for prayer, and prayer came, and Yahweh granted her an open womb here after all her mistakes. had forgiven her and opened her womb up. And then to bystanders, she says how lucky she is and how fortunate they as a couple are. Well, that was really my first opportunity to experience such a thing, and I was pretty shocked. As soon as he promised they were freed from their sicknesses, and he ordered them to sit apart with those who had been freed from demons as after the fatigue of labor. All through this book, there is a separation of peoples. Even Clement and two other disciples, Niceta and Aquila, and groups of other people that are just hearers, they have to sit outside the inner circle. And when it comes to eating, they cannot recline at the same table with the ones that have been sanctified through deliverance and baptism. Kefa explains that to Clement. It's not that we don't desire your company or consider you inferior. It's just that you're still full. You have not been exercised and baptized, and therefore you're still full, as though these things were catching, as though we couldn't sit at table with you because we don't know what's going to pop out of your mouth. And in another place, he speaks about these hearers, God-fearers, who have stuffed themselves up with unclean meats and meats sacrificed to idols and different things, and that along with those kinds of meats, those kinds of foods, that the gurgling in their bowels from it is caused by the demons that still inhabit the food that they ate. Therefore, again, there's a setting apart. And I'm wondering, is this for today? Is it that when we sit with these other people, we are sitting at the table of demons as well? Sherry, you remember at New Hope Church? I went there once when I first moved to Vero, and I sat down there with the pastor of the church, and there was a whole table of people after church. And when they went to get their food, they packed their plates to the very top with all kinds of ribs and barbecued pork and shrimp and all this stuff. Well, Jesus proclaimed all foods clean, in parentheses. And there I was with my vegetables. And this came to mind at that time. Whose table am I sitting at here? And when I even bring this up in confidence, not right out of the table, it's just I get laughed at. Yet here in this book, we're instructed that these entities still live in this stuff. And when you go to an Oriental restaurant, how do you know that your pig is not sacrificed to idols? In some of these restaurants, you can tell that it is, because often they have idols set up right in the restaurant, and including before the idol, an offering dish with often food in it, especially fruit. You see that, you know the food is sacrificed to idols. There was one restaurant that my wife and I frequented, and I can't quite remember where this was. But we ate there several times and we liked it. That was in Pensacola. That's where it was. And one wall had a mural on it, the whole wall size of a Shinto or pagan temple of some kind. And it just struck me in there. And of course, the words that come to my mind is, What am I doing here? In the presence of my enemies. We see that in the Psalms over and over again, especially in Psalm 120. David cries out, "Here I am. What am I doing in the presence of my enemies?" Well, these days, we have enemies that can't necessarily be seen with the naked eye, although Kefa says sometimes they can, but their effluviance is all around us. That's why when the man came down and baptized my wife and I in the name of Yeshua Yahweh, he had to clean the house out of the figurines and of the angelic pictures and all this other knick-knack riffraff stuff that was in the house. He said, I can't baptize you if you're going to remain in the house of the enemy. And here, Kefa on the right-hand column gives us some of the manifestations of that. How is it that the invocations of demons are performed in groves and woods? What is the meaning of the insane whirlings and the slashing of limbs and the cutting off of members? How is that mad rage? How is it that that mad rage is produced in them? How is insanity produced? How is it that women are driven violently, raging with disheveled hair? Whence the shrieking and gnashing of teeth? Whence the bellowing of the heart and the bowels? And all those things that, whether they are pretended or contrived by the ministration of demons, are exhibited to the terror of the foolish and ignorant. Are these things done for the sake of lightening the mind, or rather for the sake of oppressing it? Do ye not yet perceive nor understand that these are the counsels of the serpent lurking within you, which draws you away from the apprehension of truth by irrational suggestions of errors, that he may hold you as slaves and servants of lust and obscenity and every disgraceful thing? Of course, here Kefa is talking to the outer limit crowd. And though these things are not as prevalent today as they were, they still are. We experienced in Haiti numerous times being apprehended in the sight of a voodoo priest, a Hugan, or people who were in the insane whirlings of that worship, the which the purpose of it is just to acquire powerful demons in order for a person to fulfill their lusts and get what they want. And to see a Hugan biting the head off a live chicken is about all you want to do. When I was 20 years old, lost in Port-au-Prince in the middle of the night, I walked into one of these ceremonies. The only light face there. And I watched for a while, and then I realized where I was. And about that time, all the music stopped, and the whirling stopped, and the horror stopped, just absolutely cold. They stopped. And the whole crowd, or at least seemed to be, to me, turned to their back to look at me. Don't tell me they can't tell who a believer is. They can. But they were overpowering. What could I do as a 20-year-old except get out of there? I should say, get the hell out of there as fast as I could. And that's what I did. I was lost in town. I didn't know where to go. The taxis weren't running. I'd never been there before. So it was a horrendous thing. Although I was out in town to try to satisfy my lust. I wanted to go to the rum factory. I'd heard so much about it. And so my friend and I, we took off there in order to get some rum. What a stupid thing to do, and how sick I was the next day, and how fortunate I was. Here I go. How lucky I was that Yahweh led me back to where I was staying. That was the miracle. Moreover, the reason of the present undertaking and this occasion offered by those whom the power of Yahweh has healed suggests this subject for a beginning, namely, to show that for good reason very many persons are possessed of demons, that so the justice of Yahweh may appear. Now, here's a reason. For ignorance will be found to be the mother of almost all evils. But now let us come to the reason. And he goes on. We find it throughout the book also. Kefa talks about the problem with people is that they are ignorant, primarily. That they could be freed from the disgraceful things they do and think if they only had the knowledge and the desire to be done with such things. He talks about later on that though knowledge as opposed to ignorance is powerful, still ignorance will take hold of you and keep you enslaved if you will not commit your will to doing right. And that's where Torah comes in. We read all these deliverance books. They all tell us the same thing. Unless somebody is fully committed to the process of cleaning themselves up, that they will not get anywhere. They must be fully committed to doing it. That means they probably ought to be out as far as they can go on a limb in order to be that desirous of healing. Or maybe their life is falling apart. This is what Kefa means when he says that one of the reasons for such things is to show the justice and righteousness and the goodness of the Heavenly Father in order to, if they want to, be done with these things. I think of so many women I've talked to that have said their marriages were breaking up because of this or that or the other thing, but mainly because, and I'm not blaming women in general, mainly because the woman is so wrapped up in her pets and in her social engagements and in her children and in her possessions, forgetting that that husband is nothing more than a child of hers. Why do husbands look for women? They're looking for, in some respect, their mother again. They want attention. They want the attention of a motherly figure that's more than a mother. They wonder why their marriage is breaking up, and they blame the husband for all of a sudden he's become indifferent, or all of a sudden he doesn't care, or all of a sudden he's silent. He doesn't seem to want to talk to me, or he comes and sits in his chair all night and watches TV. Is there nothing you, the wife, can do about that? I'm sure it's the same way with the husband, but the funny thing is, it seems that, at least for me, I only hear from the wives. And trust me, the only thing I've wanted from these people is to see that their life gets better. That's all. That's all. But I protest to you with the clear voice of preaching that, on the contrary, Obeying Yahweh's Torah calls you to sobriety and modesty, orders you to refrain from effeminacy and madness, and by patience and gentleness to prevent the inroads of anger, to be content with your own possessions and with the virtue of frugality, not even when driven by poverty to plunder the goods of others, but in all things to observe justice, to withdraw yourself wholly from the idol zebaim, that is, sacrifices. Just don't think of three-dimensional objects made of wood and stone here as idols. Whatever is idolized is an idol. For by these things you invite demons to you, and of your own accord give them the power of entering into you. And so you admit that which is the cause either of madness or of false love, removed from Torah. Mark Rutland, the missionary, in one of his sermons that I still have on my site someplace, who started out a United Methodist, went into the Assemblies of God, then he's off in the missions in Africa someplace, who knows where. One who attempted to kill himself while he was in the Methodist seminary because some of the things he was learning were so far different than the perspective of the Assembly of God that he grew up in. He come to find out that these things that were troubling him and calling him to harm himself were demonic. He knew this because he read the scripture. And one thing that he prescribed to his congregations as to how to be done with such attitudes, how to be done with demonic infiltration, whether they believed in it or not, was to get back into the Torah of Yahweh and do it. Don't these foreigners hate a Torah obedient person? Do they want to come around? Speaking of demons eating you instead of you eating demons, do they want to have dinner in your flesh? If you're worshiping and obeying Yahweh only and his Torah? Christians, they're demon possessed, a lot of them. And why? Well, one thing Kefa says is because people are immoderate. But another thing that he makes very clear is that obeying Yahweh's Torah calls you to sobriety and modesty. What I hear from that is, oh, so many laws. Nobody could ever remember them. I'm so thankful that the laws are written on my heart. And to that I say, if the law is written on your heart, let's see if you can recite the 10 Commandments. They never can. Oh, but it's on my heart. But that means it's on your mind. You know what they are. And when in the Jewish law they say, commit teshuvah or shuv, that is, return, or in our Bibles, the Catholics have it, repent. It just means to turn around. You have to do the turning around. But for most of us here today, we never had grounding in the Torah. So we don't know what we're turning around to. It's something that has to be learned. And if you realize, you who think that there are too many laws there to ever understand, and they have things to do with sacrificing animals and all that stuff, then you certainly don't understand. Anything having to do with the temple, it's put aside because there's no temple there. So you end up having about 1/3 of the Torah that is still, you're still able to do, not because it's passed away, but because there's no temple. Most of those rules have to do with temple obedience. But there are the 10 Commandments. There are the law of beasts in Leviticus 11. That is the food ordinances, which are so easy. He's not putting stumbling blocks before you. He's making it very simple. And the things spoken of, we might say, in Acts chapter 15 at the conference where James the Just, the Mavaker of the entire assembly, is there giving judgment. He gives us 5 things. And the last of those is, and isn't the Torah taught every Shabbat in the synagogue? Isn't Moses taught every Shabbat in the synagogue? Of course, believers leave that one off entirely. They say there's 4 things like not drinking blood and not committing fornication, etc. But James is laying down the very least of the law that you must follow, even if you want to be a hearer of the word. You're not going to drink blood. You're not going to commit fornication. Else, you have an opportunity to pollute everybody else that's there. You have to go sit in the back row until you can come around to understanding. But then, it's like a fellow a couple years ago called me and said, I've come to Torah. Do I need to be circumcised? And I asked him, what does the Torah tell you? And he said, but it's not required by Acts 15. And I was confused. I was confused. I said, be confused no more. Look at the verse that says that Moses is taught in the synagogue. Go back to the Torah and you do what you think is fitting. I can't make a judgment like that. A person's got to come to that himself. Next thing I know, he's getting a hold of me and he says, I'm circumcised. I did it. I feel so much better. I said, who did you get to do that? He said, I did it myself. It had to be done. I felt committed to it. And I felt Yahweh drawing me to fulfill that ordinance. If somebody is really, really seeking Yahweh and to be Torah-centric, look, he's going to do it even if he has to do it himself. He could have held off, I'm sure, as some have. Moreover, perverse and erratic religions are introduced, to which the greater part of men gave themselves up, by occasion of holidays and solemnities, instituting drinking and banquets, following pipes and flutes and harps, and diverse kinds of musical instruments, and indulging themselves in every kind of drunkenness and luxury. Hence every kind of error took rise. Hence they invented groves and altars, flesh and victims, and after drunkenness they were agitated as if with mad emotions. By this means power was given to the demons to enter into the minds of this sort, so that they seemed to lead insane dances and rave like the Bacchanalians. That is a wild party. Those who worship the god of wine, Bacchus. Hence were invented the gnashing of teeth and bellowing from the depth of their bowels. He tells you what this means later on. Bellowing from the depth of their bowels. He talks about later on that some even take to themselves a god of passing wind. This is also spoken of in Book 1 when it comes to eating meats unclean. That they cause all kinds of agitations and gurglings and passings of wind. That they would make a god out of that. Here's part of it. Hence a terrible countenance and a fierce aspect in men, so that he whom drunkenness had subverted and a demon had instigated was believed by the deceived and the erring to be filled with the deity. exactly what voodoo does, exactly what Satanism practices, exactly what Santeria practices. Down here in Florida, it's a problem. All along the South here, where we have people coming up from Hispanic nations, we have these kind of things. But now I want to talk about a different religion. It's called Baha'i. Baha'i. One of the fastest growing religions. There was one like John the Baptist that came around 1840, the Bab, he's called. This was in Persia. And he was preparing the way for another to come that would be the new Messiah. That one that did come, his name was Baha'u'llah. They went through a lot of persecution in Persia. A lot of them were killed. But their religion appealed so much to the intellectual of the world that over the course of time, in the next 60 years, they got a large following of people and were able to build a gigantic home temple on Mount Carmel in Israel. And now the Baha'i faith is prevalent in the larger cities of this country. However, they don't advertise, they don't necessarily evangelize, but they put out literature. The Baha'i faith is one of the most decent, godly, Elohim-like faiths with tenets that are right out of the millennium. If you've ever looked at it or studied it, you'll find that out. You'll want to think, shouldn't I be keeping this faith? But there's one thing missed. That one thing is that Baha'is are not to believe in evil or evil spirits. That Baha'is are to believe that all people are intrinsically good. Now, our faith doesn't say people are bad. Our faith says people are good. It's the Reformed faith that says that people are born in sin and all that nonsense. Our faith says that people are good, but they're not all good. People are subject to these spirits so that the justice of Yahweh might come through. So what's wrong with Baha'i is that in their abdication of what is evil, they open the people up to receiving these kinds of evil spirits in their lives with no way to prevent it, no Torah to prevent it, but wonderful laws and rules and tenets that could only work if people were indeed good from the first. Kefa also tells us that demons and angels continue to fall and continue to look into the things of people and continue to covet the pleasures of ungodly people and drive them to it. The best religion is not enough. It has to recognize that there is evil in this world. And when people say that, how can I worship a God that allows evil to happen in this world? They don't understand. They are ignorant. But that sounds like a real good excuse for not. I have relatives that say this all the time. How can God let this happen? Why didn't God don't go do this and help them, etc.? It's no use trying to tell them because they don't want to know. That is a demonic excuse. They think they're going to stymie your understanding there, and because they think that, you're not going to bug them anymore, and that's all there is to it. Well, instead of just praying for them, I would think that you should encompass them through the Spirit with so many hardships that they have no other choice but to taste and see that Yah is good. For when they invade your senses, what are they doing other than working the things that belong to lust and injustice and cruelty, and compel you to be obedient to all things that are pleasing to them? You have no defense against them. What are you going to do? Hence also, by the friendship of demons, men are brought to disgraceful and base deeds. Hence, men proceed even to the destruction of life, suicide, murder, either through the fire of lust or through the madness of anger, through excess of grief, so that, as is well known, some have even laid violent hands upon themselves. Well, we could talk about whether suicide sends someone to hell or not, but I think that we all here have sense enough to know that not only is Elohim the Yahweh of justice, but also mercy, and knows the inner workings of every being, and does everything he can to bring forth the resurrection for all people. When he had been done speaking, he ordered those to be brought to him who were oppressed by sickness or demons, and laid his hands upon them with prayer. Look, he laid his hands on demoniacs. People think they don't dare lay hands on demoniacs because the demons will come into them. And sure enough, they will. I've felt them come through me. Some people pray, let the demon enter me or the sickness enter me so this person might be relieved. They can't come through your hands if you're revering Yahweh and keeping the Torah and acknowledging the witness and testimony of Yahshua. So he dismissed the crowds, charging them to resort to the hearing of the word during the days that he was to remain there. Therefore, when the crowds had departed, Kefa washed his body in the waters that ran through the garden, with as many of the others as chose to do so. That's significant. Why is he doing mikvah in running water? He's got to cleanse himself. When a man crawls down into the pig pen to clean up the slop that's left when the pigs are in close quarters, he's not going to come home and jump in bed with his wife or play with his children when he's smelling like that. However, one farmer said to me, when you smell that, S-H-I-T, you are smelling money, as he took me out to show me his 4 snowmobiles. For if you receive those things that we bring you, you will not only be able yourselves to escape the incursion of the demon, but also to drive them away from others. That's the important thing. You have to be on a certain level of belief in holiness. People want to rush in and try to deliver other people. That's folly. Or they get a little power and they want to go into a whorehouse and clean out the demons. That's folly. There's a certain standard that has to be met. Some of these people haven't even come from the outer circle to the inner yet. And there are people on the internet, I'm sure, that want to chase out demons by the power of demons. But look, this is what we need. If you want to get into this business, this is what is needed. But those who will refuse to receive those things that are spoken by us will be subject in the present life to diverse demons and disorders of sicknesses, and their spirits after their departure from the body will be tormented forever. Now, he doesn't say it, they all will. I like to get around passages like that. I prefer to believe in the resurrection. But if that's Peter and everything else is true that he's saying here, then why shouldn't that too? But some of those who were present and who had been for a long time distressed by demons threw themselves onto the ground, while the unclean spirits entreated they might be allowed but for one day to remain in the bodies they had taken possession of. I think I read that one already. Oh, go to any of these big revivals. We know that the Spirit is there. It's not the man up front. The Spirit deigned to come as though he were a blowing wind, finding that place. And we find people in the crowd laying on the ground, rolling around, foaming at the mouth, barking like dogs, hissing like serpents, dashing their tongues out, rolling their hair around, taking their clothes off. It still happens. So he ordered them to sit apart. We already went through that. Okay, one more, and we'll come back to this next time.
New message is received from +1 772 200 2335.
Oh, that's good. I'm sure I'm going to look at that one. How demons get power over men. Therefore, demons, as we have just said, when once they have been able by means of opportunities afforded them to convey themselves through base and evil actions into the bodies of men, if they remain in them a long time through their own negligence, that is the man's negligence, because they do not seek after what is profitable to the inner being, they necessarily compel them for the future to fulfill the desires of the demons who dwell in them. But what is worst of all, I might say, have you ever heard anybody say, I hate that I do it? Or I do what I hate. I can't help myself. I can't help myself anymore. That particular behavior has been tolerated too long. But what is worst of all, at the end of the age, when the demon will be consigned to ageless fire, of necessity, the spirit also that obeyed him will with him be tortured in ageless fires, together with its body that it has polluted. Well, we know right now that the body is going to burn up if it goes into a place like that. As for what lives on, I don't know. But this idea is in complete keeping with 2 Peter, especially chapter 3, concerning the burning of all things evil. We've heard that 2 Peter is not authentic and 1 Peter is, but I would suggest to you that 1 Peter is not authentic, but 2 Peter is very authentic, because it holds to some of these most primitive ideas. Now, hopefully, in some of these things, we might be enlightened with all these years of study and research behind us into the things of Elohim, that is theology and divinity. Divinity? That's what my master's degree is in. Someone asked me one time, I'm sure I told you this. I said, well, my master's is in divinity. And that person said to me, you mean candy making? Completely serious. You know, there's a Christmas candy called Divinity, and it is divine. Well, I was nice about it. I thought she was joking at first. So let's stop there, and I'll ask you a question or two. Talk to me. What's valuable here? Everybody fall asleep?
No.
That's okay if you did fall asleep.
Well, I think what's valuable here is you can use a lot of that, like you said, with today. You see all these people who are raging and flailing around and acting out like they're possessed, because they probably are. And this tells you why and how it happened, and that you can try to heal them if they're demon sick. But it also tells you that you yourself have to get clean afterwards, and that's something good to know. So if you go out in a place where you've got all these people and you try to help them, you can. But if they'll listen and follow what you're telling them, but you're going to have to get cleaned up afterwards, because the stuff will come back with you. And the whole idea is being set apart from people who aren't quite of the same, I don't want to say level of holiness, but I'll say
Might as well. Might as well.
okay, well, I was going to say more like level of compliance with lawfulness, with Yahweh's lawfulness. You know, that can pollute you even if you are a little higher level. So it makes sense to stay separate until they reach the same level of cleanliness and conformity to lawfulness.
What's that saying by Paul? Good company, bad company ruins good morals.
Yes.
Bad company ruins good morals. Oh, I wanted to remark on that, but I forgot what I was going to say. Anybody else?
Yeah, something that I noticed in this writing is that it talked about, the Allison touched on it a little bit, but I think it talked about the importance of living right.
Absolutely.
If you're going to do this, and you're going to be taking on the enemy, and in his own backyard, you must, we must be living right. Because if you're a bad witness and you go in there, what is the enemy going to do? His job is to be the prosecutor general. And he's going to witness against you. And you talked about this before, Jack, about how these demons during these exorcisms or probings will say things, and they will even do things to embarrass you. And if you're not living right during the course of these extractions or probings, that will be found out.
Absolutely.
So to live a holy lifestyle, or as holy as you can, is very important, because I think Yeshua talks about not giving occasion to the enemy to accuse you, because that's his job, is to be the accuser. So living a holy lifestyle, I mean, it does no good to say, well, I'm going to heal this person. First of all, it's not you. It's the power of the Almighty that does the work. You just the vessel. And so if we'll just understand that first and foremost, work to clean ourselves up, then we could take dominion and authority over these spirits.
Right. And later on in book 4, Kefa says that for those who act in moderation, there is an automatic protection by Yahweh, an automatic protection. It's those that are carried away with these things and have no self-will or self-compliance. That's a really good word. The protection goes away. He'll only allow the demon to go so far. And I should say his protection to go so far. And then after that, you're on your own. Couple on the chat. Yes, Sherry, thank you for coming. Living holy includes sin with our mouths, such yes, as gossip, especially about one of Yahweh's children. So that demon could say in that case, but who are you? What goes around comes around. That is for sure. That's for sure.
I think it's in any form of sin, whether it's with the mouth or anything, it's going to come out. It doesn't matter. Whatever's there, it's going to come out. And Yeshua even said, anything that's in the dark is going to be brought to the light. Everything.
Well, that one is a really, really slippery slope. I don't think there's anybody that we know that hasn't been guilty of that in maybe multiple times, but that's one that just kind of sneaks out. You know, it sneaks out. We have to lasso and pull that in. Just seems like a natural propensity of evil within us to talk about other people for one reason or the other. A lot of times out of jealousy. Anything else? Well, I thank you so much for being a part of this segment. Looking into the mirror is usually the last thing we do. Amen. And we'll continue to the rest of this on Sunday night. Thank you for coming. Love y'all.